Hi everyone. Today we're going to talk about the very important topic, what makes Breaking Bad so good? So I'm sure that a lot of you watching this have already seen the show. If you haven't seen the show, I suggest you turn this off and go watch it. I know it's 5 seasons and I just marathon watched it over the course of a few weeks. It's great, but this review is going to contain a lot of spoilers. So if you plan on seeing the show, don't continue. Without further ado, let's see. From a writing perspective, this show was brilliant, even from a cinematography perspective, which I'm not a cinematographer, um, so now this isn't just a raving fangirl thing. I'm going to actually dive into what I thought the show did right, as opposed to what so many shows have gotten wrong. So let's see. So first of all, one thing I noticed within the first few episodes, the characters are smart. All of the main characters, Walt, Hank, Skyler, Saul, even Saul Goodman, um, the drug lord Gus, the hitman Mike, um, even there's even hints that Jesse, the drug addict, they are intelligent characters. They figure things out. They're not. The show doesn't rely on them being too stupid to notice things. In fact, it gives them each a type of respect, which I found refreshing and unusual. It's something I personally value in writing, and I find way too many TV shows, movies, and books rely on a character being too stupid to figure something out. Another thing was the characters are all consistent. They have a goal and a flaw that doesn't change, even though the character might change. So, for instance, Walt, the the main character who goes and becomes a meth kingpin, he always wants to provide for his family. It doesn't change. That's his main goal, and that's what he is. That's what he's all about. And his flaw is pride. Also, never changes. Um, Now, throughout the course of the show, he goes from being a very bumbling, ineffectual high school teacher to basically someone who's pretty scary. Everyone's afraid of him, even his own wife, even his associates. Um, he becomes something like a criminal mastermind. And but throughout all of that, those two goals, the goal and the flaw that he has, never change. Um, and the same is true for every character there. Jesse, his assistant, sort of assistant, friend, colleague, whatever you want to call him, mentor, pupil. Jesse always wants to get high. Never changes about him. He wants to escape. He wants to forget about the problems that he has and the things that he hates about himself. And that never changes. He's always seeking to get high. He's an addict. And, he might try to get out of that in a few episodes, but he always goes back to it. And then his flaw, of course, is self-hatred. Never changes about himself. He's always feeling guilty. He's always having a problem with the things he's done. And he is clearly self-destructive. So, anyway, um, another thing was that there's a lot of irony, meaning the characteristics that these characters have are great contrasts. Um, so, for instance, Jesse could be a great person. We see a lot of hints that he comes from a good, stable family. He's pretty smart, or he could have been. Um, he's good looking. He has qualities that could have made him much more than what he becomes. But he hates himself too much. Now, the irony is that he's actually morally better than anyone else in the show. He hates himself for the things he's done. He hates him. He can't stand all the murder, all the he's absolutely draws the line at at all sorts of things. So although all these other characters that, including police detectives and so forth, that are on the right side of the law, they actually are okay with a lot of the violence and a lot of what's going on, and he's not. He's never okay with it. And so there's some irony in his self-hatred. He's what most people would consider very morally upstanding. Um, so all the characters have some irony in them. Another great one I thought was the character of Lydia, who is a she's sort of a middleman between meth dealers, and she is a terrified person. She's paranoid, she's always afraid of things, she just wants to protect her child, but she kills whatever she fears. So she's always putting out hits on people. And the irony, of course, is that putting out hits on these dangerous people, on hitmen, on drug dealers, it's liable to get her killed. And eventually, of course, Walt is the one who ends up killing her. So, all sorts of others, like Todd, he's like a Boy Scout. He's always saying, "Gee, Mr. White," but he's okay with shooting kids and torturing people. So, not quite. There's a lot of irony in his Boy Scout act. I thought one of the best ones was Hank Shrader, Walt's brother-in-law, who is the DEA agent, the detective. He acts like a buffoon. So he's sort of like, hey, he's always joking around. He's kind of ineffectual looking. He's short, he's fat, he's bald. But he is actually very perceptive as a detective, and he keeps busting cases when nobody else is noticing these little things that solve the case. And not only is he perceptive as a detective, but he can handle himself in a gunfight. He's got almost like a sixth sense where he's able to figure out what's going on, and you feel very sure that even if the odds are against him, he's going to come out on top. So the irony is that he comes close to busting Walt numerous times throughout the series. He pegs everyone close to Walt. He tracks down leads that everyone else is missing. And the problem that he has, his main flaw, is that he has everyone pegged. He decides that drug dealers are bad and his friends and neighbors are good. And to him, Walt is a bumbling, sweet school teacher. He never suspects Walt, even when there's multiple points of evidence pointing him in the like just staring him in the face, and as a viewer that if it was anyone else, he would have caught the evidence. It's all things that he's definitely perceptive enough to pick up on. But because he is so certain that he knows good people and bad people, he kind of prejudges them. And his surety about Walt is what makes it possible for Walt to get away with it for so long. And I love the climax of the series in season 5 when he does finally figure it out. A little slip up on Walt's part. And he finally starts putting things together, and then he can't believe what kind of person Walt truly is. So let's see. Another good one was his wife. She has everything, but she's a kleptomaniac and a compulsive liar. So the irony there being that she morally judges people. She can't stand what when she finds out what Walt and Skyler, her sister, are up to, all the criminal behavior, instant judgment, she wants them killed. So there's all sorts. I think all the major irony is things that anyone can pick up on. Well, I mean, Walt wants to provide for his family. He does things that drives him away. So the more he tries to provide, the more his family hates him. He keeps secrets to protect them and to protect himself. His wife hates secrets, can't stand being lied to. He makes millions. He ends up with $80 million. He can't keep it. He can't use it. He ends up having to trust his enemies to give it to his children. So, anyway, and they even brought it full circle. Like, I think one of the first meth cooks he went on with Jesse in season 1, Jesse says something like, "Are you going to build a robot, Mr. White?" And he's like, "Are you kidding me? No, why would you even think that?" Season 5, he does build sort of a robot to kill a giant cartel of neo-Nazis. So, anyway, there's a lot of self-aware irony within the show. Another thing I thought was great, each episode has a prologue or a teaser which is rather than a recap. So in almost every other TV show you see out there, last week, blah blah blah, and then they show a montage of what happened last week to catch the viewer up. This show, they don't do that. Instead, they kind of fill the viewer in on some story point or character. So there's a little bit of extra character development or world development, and that's the prologue instead of a recap. And it ends up being relevant, and it's like they just trust the viewer to remember what was going on, which I love. Um, Similarly, each episode has a very strong ending. Climatic episode. Um, this is such a memorable ending, and of course, there's quotes all over the internet for many of these episode endings. This one, was when Hank finally learns what his brother-in-law truly is. And he says, I don't know who you are anymore. I don't know you. And, like all this time, for 5 seasons, we've been, along with Walt, worrying about getting caught. And so it's finally happened, and you kind of expect Walt to run or say, oh, just flip out, because he does tend to fly off the handle. And instead he says, if you don't know who I am, if that's true, then maybe your best course would be to tread lightly. And you realize, yeah, he just can't, he's become somebody that is truly dangerous. He's fully embraced that life. So, with any good story, there's escalating stakes. The first few episodes of the series were about survival, and the goals that Walt had, the main character, were pretty reasonable. He just wanted to survive, pay for his chemo treatment, and his wife's coming baby. Well, his coming baby. And that was it. And then, the goals start getting more and more involved, with that it's escalating. So, it becomes about protecting his family, protecting himself, then it becomes about building an empire. So I thought another thing, the series has a very strong hook, the first 2 episodes. And it's important to start a story with a strong hook to make the characters likable. And what you have there is a problem, a problem that's not immediately solvable. The viewer watches it and can't figure out how they're going to solve it. And so in this case, they've got a dead body and they've got a guy chained up in the basement. And the viewer has seen that Walt is crying about having to kill someone. He's totally out of his depth. He went from being a bumbling school teacher to having life or death stakes, and he doesn't know what to do. He's terrified. And the last thing he wants to do is kill somebody. And Jesse as well is just, he can't handle it. Neither one of them are prepared for this. And so the viewer is thinking, how are they going to get out of this? Are they going to kill this guy? They don't have the gumption. It's pretty clear. And the other guy, how are they going to dispose of the body? They are not, they're not hardened criminals. They don't know what to do. And they solve it in interesting ways. And so the viewer it builds respect right away. The viewer is like, wow. They come up with a way to a chemical way to decompose the one body, which, because Walt is a high school chemistry teacher, he figures that out. The other guy, Walt is looking for any excuse not to kill him. He's chained up and he's like, well, just give me an excuse to let you live, to the criminal. And the criminal, of course, becomes sort of friendly with him and he's convincing him. And then Walt realizes that he looks in the trash can, he sees that there is a shard of plate missing, and he knows that he's in danger, and the minute he lets the guy go, he will be murdered, most likely. And so when the stakes become it's him or me, Walt, crying, kills him. And it's a pretty emotional scene, and you realize, okay, he's willing to kill in order to protect himself and his family. And so you still have respect for him as the viewer. And it's solved in a way that it wasn't quite what you expected. So there's the hook. So going back to the stakes thing, there's also sort of a slippery slope there, because you wonder, at what point is it not okay? Like, at what point uh, protecting your family from a thug is one thing, but where does it go? And so you know that you're always worried in the back of your mind that Walt is getting in deeper into a culture that his family will never be safe. And so what's he going to do? Like, how far will he go? Um, and I remember one of the big pivotal moments in season one. Um, he's talking to Tuco, which is a crazy drug lord, and he says, the Tuco is like threatening him. He's already beaten up his partner Jesse, and you're thinking, how is he going to get out of this? It's another problem that doesn't seem solvable. He comes up with a a chemical solution, crystallized mercury fulminate, tested on Mythbusters. Actually works apparently. And he goes, "You've got everything right, Tuco, except for one thing. This isn't meth." And he throws it, and it's a bomb. It just explodes. And so he scares the hell out of the drug lords. And, he'll go to some lengths, and he's pretty resourceful. And that's when you start to get more into the show. So another thing I thought was really great and really interesting, and that's that all the murder and the crime and the drug culture is not glorified in the show. I see a lot of shows where it's kind of brushed off or treated very lightly, as if it's kind of funny, and it'll be like, oh, they murdered someone, haha. And in this show, the people in this culture, and even including Walt, the big criminal mastermind, they are pathetic in many ways, and they're shown that way. And one of the great quotes there is the hitman Mike says, after Walt kills the big drug lord, so now he's like the head of the empire, or he's got his own meth empire. His hitman says, just because you shot Jesse James, don't make you Jesse James. And it's true, and you realize, the drug lord that he shot spent 40 years building up that empire, building up that business. And Walt is unhinged, and he just doesn't have the time or the patience to build that empire. And, but he's delusional because it's not delusion, but he's got nothing to lose, and he just doesn't care. And so anyway, so the character is not glorified. He is a criminal mastermind, but he's definitely got his major mental issues. Now, a really great aspect of the show is that it delves very deep into the question of how far is it morally okay to slide when protecting your loved ones. And I think that this show has a lot in common with HBO's Game of Thrones in that respect. So you see a lot of like sort of gray areas, as they say. The hitman Mike, he protects women and children as well as criminals. And you do wonder, like, well, what made him change from a police detective to the wrong side of the law? And there are implications that he doesn't see. He sees the right side of the law and the wrong side of the law as somewhat of the same thing with minor differences. The viewer might start to wonder what separates Walt and Skyler, the upstanding suburban citizens who gradually descend into crime. What separates them from crazy Tuco's cousins? These are the Mexican cartel people, who are bent on revenge. You might say, well, Walt's doing it for his family. He's just trying to protect what's his. But so are Tuco and his cousins. Walt resorts to poisoning a child at one point. He says, "Oh, I measured the dose," but you wonder. I mean, he could have accidentally killed that child, and even so, poisoning a child, putting a kid in the hospital, not so morally great. He bombs a nursing home, again, to get rid of bad guys, but he waves off an innocent child on a dirt bike who got shot. So, like he descends into areas that you would expect it's because he is in that culture. he ends up having to take the same measures that the real bad guys do have to take. Um, his wife Skyler, when she's threatened, she's so the whole show she's set up as being a moral person. She's not on board with her boss's embezzlement. She's definitely not on board when she finds out about what her husband is up to with the drug dealing. She wants nothing to do with it. She's horrified. And yet, when she's threatened, when her family is threatened, her ex-boss and ex-boyfriend, he gets caught by the IRS for embezzling, and she's the one who signed off on those documents. And so she hires goons to get rid of him, basically. Well, not to get rid of him, but to threaten him. All she wants to do is threaten him, and it turns out much worse than what she expected. But there she is. She's set up as a very moral person who's not on board with any of these crimes, and yet even she resorts to crimes when threatened. And the viewer does wonder, like, when threatened, what would you do? The big drug lord, Gustavo Fring, he is bent on revenge for his murdered brother, the guy that he saved from the slums of a city in Chile. And he's got good motives for revenge. I mean, so again, you do kind of wonder, even there's always like this sort of humanity to these people. The desire to avenge, protect, and get justice, they're on both sides, the good guys and the bad guys. So that's very interesting. I also thought interesting that, as with drug cartels and gangs, Walt's definition of family begins to broaden and begins to extend to, well, only to one other person, which is Jesse. But they become sort of like almost like comrades. Like they've survived all sorts of they've protected and survived and killed for each other so many times. They have something deep going on, and it is shown as a family thing. In fact, when Walt meets with Mr. Margolis, the father of Jesse's one-time girlfriend, Jane, he's about to go home and just leave Jesse to die from drug overdose. And Mr. Margolis says, well, what else have you, like, family is the most important thing. There's nothing else that's more important. And he goes and he watches Jane die and more or less saves Jesse, sends him to drug rehab. So the viewer has to wonder, like, there's a lot of rationalizing going on as well. Hank rationalizes putting thugs in jail, even if he doesn't know the whole story on them, because he just puts them in these categories, good guys and bad guys. And Walt begins to rationalize murder and all sorts of horrible things in the exact same way that Hank is doing. They're bad people, they're a threat, and that's it. So for me, I thought that Walt really begins to step over the line by poisoning the child Brock. And even so, I by that point, I think it was the 4th season, I was very engaged with him and his family, and you have so much respect for what his family is going through. And even though you know it's going to end badly, you know that Walt is going down, and he's too mentally unstable. He's got too many issues. You still have enough. You're just engaged by all the side characters. You're engaged by how it's going to end for him. And he's a very tragic figure. He's not he's just a very tragic figure. And I suppose you could call this show a tragedy, or at least it ends that way. And yet there's so many humorous moments, and it's just so much fun to watch. There are so many moments where you're wondering, how are they going to get out of this situation? And so I have to say kudos to the writers. They did a great job, and beautiful cinematography and everything. Great show. All right, I'll see you all next week.